You're a good man, Charlie Brown.
I'm not sure that was really Lucy saying that. I'm going to give a little introduction for the message today. First of all, we're talking about the gospel according to Peanuts. And we have many ways to approach that. Hopefully, when we get through, you'll find your own ways to perceive the gospel in Peanuts. I want to talk to you about how I got interested in Peanuts. Let me see that first picture right there. Anybody know what that is? Anybody? It's a newspaper. Good, good. What newspaper is it? The Oklahoma City Times. Anybody read that lately?
No, probably 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's been gone for quite a while. That was the evening paper that we had together with the Daily Oklahoman. That was the morning paper. And then the Oklahoma City Times was in the evening. And my father would buy the paper after he finished work and was on the way home. And he always wanted to get the Blue Streak edition. And I never knew there was such a thing as any kind of streak edition. But according to him, the Blue Streak edition was the latest copy of the news. And he wanted that because he was interested in investments. He was doing his best to lose money in the stock market. And it worked out pretty well. But he would bring the paper home. And of course, I had no interest in very much of it, especially the stock market. But I would look at the second picture, Peanuts, which was on the comics page. And I found that it stuck out to me from all the other comics. They had a whole page of comics, but that one got my attention the most. And I thought that it was the best. And you know, who says it is the best? There's no way to really say. But there are a lot of great things about it. And a lot of people in time appreciated it a lot. And as a result, you'll hear some things in the video in just a moment about the way that all developed. Well, I want to say that that was the first way that I connected with Peanuts. And then the second was, the next picture, these paperback books. They were put out at the time when I was in junior high. And that's like middle school for some people. And I would take these one at a time up to school, and I would read them in class when I didn't have anything else to do. And no teacher ever challenged me. Nobody objected at all, because I wasn't talking, and I wasn't making trouble, and I wasn't laughing like I did a lot. And so I learned a lot, not only from the curriculum, but from Charles Schultz when I was in junior high, in class. There was a limit, of course. Sometimes I had to listen. I didn't like that much, but anyway. I would like for us, as we hear about the Peanuts gang, to think of them as the body of Christ. Now, it's never said anywhere in Peanuts that they are the body of Christ, but you'll see that they make up quite a motley crew. They are very varied in great ways. No two of them are exactly alike, and some of them are pretty far out, just like us. So think about that as you're introduced to these characters. And so now we'll move on to the rest of the sermon, which will be presented in video form if everything works. Let's take a look together at the Peanuts Gospel. The Gospel according to Peanuts. Now, why would we look for such a thing? Actually, it's not our idea. The idea came from Robert L. Short, who wrote a book to that effect, and it was published in 1964. A lot of people read it, and a lot of people saw that there are some interesting theological things in Peanuts. Recently, Jonathan Merritt wrote an article entitled "The Spirituality of Snoopy: how the faith of Charles Schultz, creator of the Peanuts comic, shaped his work. He says in that article, years after his death in 2000, Schultz was still the third top-earning deceased celebrity, trailing only Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson. But Schultz also revolutionized his industry by using his strip to subtly raise religious questions about the Bible, prayer, the nature of God, and the end of the world. Schultz was a devoted Christian. Unshell the peanuts and you'll find the fingerprints of his faith. By mixing Snoopy with spirituality, he made his readers laugh while inviting them into a depth of conversation uncommon to the funny pages. Now, this is interesting to me. More than 560 of Schultz's nearly 17,800 Peanuts newspaper strips contain a religious, spiritual, or theological reference. To put this into perspective, Schultz only produced 61 strips featuring the famous scene where Lucy pulls the football away from Charlie Brown as he tries to kick it. Schultz's most recognizable reference to religion occurs in the Charlie Brown Holiday Special, exploring the true meaning of Christmas. Realizing that the holiday's secular accoutrements did not form the essence of Christmas, Linus reads the story of Jesus' birth directly from the Gospel of Luke. At the time, less than 9% of Christmas episodes and specials contained any religious references. Schultz once said, "I preach in these cartoons, and I reserve the same rights to say whatever I want to say as the minister in the pulpit. You can grind out daily gags, but I'm not interested in simply doing gags," Schultz would say. "I'm interested in doing a strip that says something and makes some comment on the important things of life." Schultz converted to Christianity shortly after returning from deployment in World War II, and the experience sparked a love inside of him for sacred literature. He was a longtime Sunday school teacher at churches in the Midwest and California, even leading one group through the study of the entire Old Testament. Later in his life, Schultz began to refer to himself as a secular humanist, as his theology became less traditional. This did not mean he was no longer a Christian, but rather that he now believed other faiths might also provide legitimate paths to God. He was also less concerned about other Christian doctrines. So let's delve into this a little bit. Charles Monroe Sparky Schultz is the author and artist, the genius behind Peanuts. He was born in 1922 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He grew up in St. Paul. Now, he had an interesting nickname, Sparky, which came to him from his uncle. His uncle came in and took a look at him when he was a baby, and he immediately said, "That kid looks just like Sparkplug." The Sparkplug was the horse of Barney Google in the famous comic strip, which was extremely popular at the time. And when Charles Schultz got old enough to look at comics, he loved it. And he kept that nickname. And he said, "If you're a true friend of mine, you won't call me Charlie or Charles or something like that. You'll call me instead Sparky, because that's my nickname." Now, in 1927, Charlie Schultz was about 15, and he drew a picture of his dog Spike. And he sent that picture to Ripley's Believe It or Not, another comic strip, which was very popular. And believe it or not, his drawing appeared in Robert Ripley's syndicated panel, and it was captioned, "A hunting dog that eats pins, tacks, and razor blades is owned by C.F. Schultz, St. Paul, Minnesota." And also, it said, "Drawn by Sparky." Sparky's the one who drew it. Sparky's the one who sent it in. So that was his first connection with professional cartooning. When he got to be 21, he was drafted into the Army. It was 1943, only to learn that his mother was seriously ill with cancer. And when he went to see her and tell her goodbye, she told him she would probably never see him again, since he was going away,
It was a heartbreaking experience for him, and it wasn't too long after that she did pass away, and he was away serving his country. In late 1945, Charles Schultz returned to Minneapolis, and in July 1946 he took a job at the Art Instruction Incorporated, where he reviewed and graded students' work. And I had the privilege of taking that correspondence course when I was young, as did Charles Schultz. In 1948 through 1949, Charles Schultz sold a total of 17 cartoons to none other than the Saturday Evening Post. He was really getting into it. Of course, that doesn't mean there weren't many more cartoons that he sent other places that were rejected. Schultz drew a weekly series of one-panel jokes entitled Little Folks. It was published from June 1947 to January 1950 in the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Now, later that year, Schultz approached United Feature Syndicate with his Little Folks strip to see if they were interested. Schultz developed a comic strip because they were interested, indeed. So he developed a comic strip using 4 panels instead of 1, just to make himself more desirable. And to his delight, the syndicate preferred this new version. He wanted to call it Little Folks. That's what he called it in the hometown newspaper. However, the syndicate did not like the name. They wanted something new. I think they probably were afraid a lawsuit would come someday from the hometown newspaper. And they decided it should be called Peanuts. Sparky hated the name Peanuts. It had nothing to do with his characters, nothing to do with anything in his comic strip, but his syndicate loved it, and he was stuck with it. He tried to change the name so it would have a subtitle about good old Charlie Brown, the main character of the comic strip, but it didn't really stick. So we have an unremarkable, remarkable man, surely the most intriguing sort. The still waters of the Peanuts comic strips runs deep. According to his widow, Jeannie Schultz, he used to say that he was a little bit of all the characters. Charlie Brown is my wishy-washy and insecure side, he said. Lucy is my smart-aleck side. Linus is my more curious and thoughtful side. Snoopy is the way I would like to be, fearless, the life of the party, and brushing off Lucy's bad temper with a glancing kiss. I think that's a good way to approach this comic strip when we consider the gospel according to Peanuts, that in several different portraits, through his characters, he talked about elements of himself and the way that he lived, the way he approached life. Maybe the character's genius as an ensemble, it's been said, is that they perfectly anatomize what it is to be human. I think the comic strips carry simple truths, Jeannie has said. It is a mixed world out there, sometimes sweet, sometimes joyous, and sometimes disappointing. So what do we see in these characters when we look at them one by one? Well, first we come to Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown is the closest thing to Charlie Schultz. He is, according to Schultz, his self-depiction, although, as he has stated, there are bits of himself in the other characters as well. You notice we have the same first name, Charlie Brown, Charlie Schultz. So that's a pretty good clue right there. Schultz was somewhat of a loner when he was a young person, and perhaps that continued all his life, since he spent most of his life sitting in his studio drawing pictures of the Peanuts gang, and that surely is not the most social of ways to spend your time. When he was in school, he was sharp enough to skip a couple of semesters, and he wound up being the youngest kid in his class. This caused him to feel isolated from the other students and to have a hard time getting along with them. He became quite the quiet person, and he was already drawing. He decided he would submit some drawings of his to be placed in the school yearbook. However, they were rejected. Can you imagine that? As time went on, he would become one of the most famous artists in the world, and most definitely one of the most successful artists that has ever lived. But he wasn't good enough for the yearbook. Wow. I think they blew it. But then again, I don't have the drawings to show you. I suspect they're pretty good. Charlie Brown is not one who often wins. In fact, I'm not sure that he ever wins. Whenever he has a team that's playing against another team, they inevitably lose. And in so many ways, he has to cope with losing in his life. Perhaps Charlie Schultz felt the same way. There were things in his life that were certainly difficult to take. However, he won the big one being he got published. He got that comic strip before the world, and it turned out to be a beloved comic strip. And although he's been gone now since the year 2000, it is still being printed all over the world as if it were brand new, and people still cherish it as they always did. That's pretty amazing victory. Pretty amazing. As far as I'm concerned, Snoopy comes next, and it's hard to say he doesn't come first, because he's such an important part of this comic strip. Snoopy started off looking and acting like a normal dog, and as time went on, he began to evolve, and he became not only a dog, but so much more than a dog. He became a creature that could fantasize about anything, that had no boundaries to the things that he would attempt to do. He's kind of a miracle dog. Some people have wondered if perhaps he symbolizes God in the comic strip. G-O-D, spelled backwards, is dog. That may be just a coincidence, however. We have Lucy. Now, Lucy is the fuss budget of the neighborhood. She is impossible to please, and she knows it all, she thinks, when in fact she demonstrates she does not know it all. She has a sadistic streak. She likes to inflict pain and discomfort on those around her. And the one that is the most famous is her episodes with the football and Charlie Brown. Somehow she always manages to get Charlie Brown to try and kick that football. And of course, she always pulls it back at the last moment, and he goes flying through the air and crashes down in despair. It's not all roses in the Peanuts world, that's for sure. She has a brother named Linus, a younger brother, and he is a sweet person, perhaps the sweetest one in the gang. He's also quite spiritual. He's often quoting scripture and lofty thoughts. However, he's insecure, and he carries around a blanket, his security blanket. And in fact, I understand that Schultz coined the term security blanket to describe this special blanket of Linus's, and it's become a universally recognized term that is used in all kinds of contexts, often having nothing to do with this comic strip. Linus is probably the best friend in this comic strip, and he's always there to commiserate with Charlie Brown. If only he could put that blanket down. That's an ongoing trial that he faces, and the others try and force him in different ways to get away from the security blanket, but somehow it never quite takes. Schroeder is the musician of the comic strip. He is a Beethoven fanatic, and he plays a tiny piano that somehow he gets amazing results out of, and he plays come rain or shine. Schultz put a lot of time into drawing the strips that had Schroeder in it because he would very painstakingly draw every piece of music that was included at the top of the panel in the Schroeder stories. And that definitely takes time. And it's a little bit of a hint about the dedication that he had as an artist. Schultz, that is, not Schroeder. Lucy has a love thing for Schroeder, and she is always hanging around trying to convince him that he loves her. And she's always annoyed by the thing that means the very most to him. She doesn't appreciate his music, and she wishes that it would all go away, or he would at least play a song that she would appreciate. But then again, I doubt that there is a song that he would be able to play that she would really appreciate, because I suspect she's jealous of that piano, more than a little bit jealous. But it doesn't get Schroeder down. He'll keep on playing from here to doomsday. And then there is Pigpen. Pigpen is a boy who is always physically dirty. He is as grimy as they come. He normally appears with a cloud of dust surrounding him, and he simply cannot get clean. If he goes and takes a bath, the dirt simply regathers around him. Amazingly, miraculously, he is doomed to be the one who is always in need of a good cleaning. Schultz has admitted that Pigpen is a pretty shallow concept, but nonetheless he was a favorite of many readers, and so he kept him around and used him whenever he could think up a new and fresh way to make use of Pigpen's strange situation. I might think it has something to do with the doctrine of sin, but then again, perhaps I'm being a little too theological for such a shallow character as Pigpen. Charlie Brown has a sister named Sally. Sally is one who always reacts negatively to school and to homework. That is her main shtick. And then there's Woodstock. Woodstock is one of the newer characters. He was named after, of course, the rock festival Woodstock, which was a huge event taking place at the end of the 1960s, which you simply could not be ignorant that it had happened. It was such a huge media thing. And Woodstock, of course, is someone who is perhaps kind of hippie-like, carefree. He's like someone who could go to a music festival and be there for days and days and not miss out on anything in his life. I suspect that Woodstock was created by Schultz to connect with the younger readers because the humor of Woodstock is usually nonverbal. In fact, he doesn't really talk. He just cheeps. He has no words. He simply has an accent mark that comes out of his mouth every time he makes a sound. But his very best friend is Snoopy, and they get along extremely well, other than when they have their little arguments. Woodstock is a good character, and it enabled Schultz to be funny in a different way, a way that younger people could appreciate more. And then there's Peppermint Patty. She's a tomboy with, it's been said, a devastating singleness of purpose. She has a one-track mind. And one example of this is she always insists on calling Charlie Brown Chuck. And you never know why. There's no explanation why. But she always calls him Chuck. And I don't think he appreciates it very much. Nobody else calls him Chuck. It's her special name. Franklin is a character who was introduced later in the strip, and he is an intelligent African-American boy who mainly reacts to the oddness of the other characters. A letter was received once by Schultz which pointed out that there were no African-American characters in the strip, and it would be appreciated if one could be added. And so one was. And Franklin is a good stabilizing character for the strip. He always seems a little more in touch with the reality of the situation than many of the characters around him. Marcy is the best friend of Peppermint Patty. She is an unassuming one with sage-like insights. For some reason, she calls Peppermint Patty Sir. She has this great respect for her, although it seems that she doesn't think that Peppermint Patty is always that intelligent or in touch with the facts of a situation. Maybe it's just simply a chain of command thing. I don't know. One of the newer characters is Rerun, and Rerun is the youngest character in the strip, I think. He is the youngest brother of Lucy and Linus, and we often see him riding around on the back of his mother's bicycle. Which brings me to an observation I must make, and that is the obvious thing that adults are not ever seen totally in the strip. If you're going to see an adult, you'll only see the part that can be seen without lifting the eyes too much. Because we live in the world of these children, and in the animated version, if an adult talks, It sounds like a muted trumpet rather than a human voice. And there are no words that can be discerned because adults, well, they're not exactly like kids. And kids are not exactly like adults. There is another new character named Eudora. And Eudora is one of our family names in our Harrison family. Eudora is Sally's best friend. And then there's Peggy Jean. Peggy Jean was introduced in the 90s. Charlie Brown finally got a girlfriend. Wow, that's amazing. Miracles do happen. The little red-headed girl was the one that he chased after for a long time, but he always admired her from afar. There was never any success in their relationship, if it can even be called a relationship. But apparently Peggy Jean is somehow more approachable. Perhaps Charlie Brown had grown up a little bit by that time. So here we see these characters, and we see that they are all unique. We have some characters that are less significant. Some of them sort of disappeared from the strip as time went on. I'll list them briefly. They are Patty, Shermie, Violet, Frida, and Farron the cat. Charles Schultz tried to introduce a cat into the comic strip at one point, and after he did so, he realized pretty quickly that he could not draw a cat to his own satisfaction. And so that cat disappeared and was replaced by a next-door cat that never was seen. The only thing that you ever saw were the results of the cat's attacks upon Snoopy and Snoopy's house. Definitely, Schultz was not a cat person. But when I look at his drawings of a cat, they look okay to me. I guess I'm not quite as condemning in my view as he was of his own work. That's merely one example of the perfectionism that Charles Schultz had when it came to his characters and his comic strip. There are several messages, I think, that we can get from the comic strip Peanuts. One is, it's okay to be called Peanuts for years and years and years, even if your creator doesn't like the name, because that's what happened, and it still turned out to be an absolute wonder of a success. In Peanuts, it's okay to lose. Their team never won. Life includes many troubles. Life is sometimes a struggle. So, watch out for some little girls with a football. You might regret it if you don't. Don't trust that little girl to hold the football while you kick it, even if she's your counselor and you pay her to give you good advice about your own life. People sometimes disappoint you, just as you sometimes disappoint them, and also yourself. However, happiness is a warm puppy. Sometimes, not always. If you're in a good groove, stick with it. Schultz did, right up to the end, and we've all been blessed as a result. Dream big, like Snoopy, or like Charlie Schultz. Or should I call him Sparky?